I'm sitting down with Mariel Nanasi, the Executive Director of New Energy Economy. Now, Mariel, people have seen in the news a lot lately about this $791 million case with P&M. Can you tell us a little bit about those rates cases?
So P&M has a pending rate case. They're asking for $791 million, which will be a 9.65% increase for residential rates. So just think about that as 10%, because that's an easier number to address. And so there are a number of issues in that case that we are asking to be denied, actually, and we're asking ultimately for there to be a decrease in P&M rates.
Now, we keep seeing this word coming up a lot with these cases, this word imprudence. Why is that so important, and how does that apply to these cases?
So the way it works is if P&M prudently invests in a resource like a coal plant or a solar plant, then we have to pay for the costs of its prudent investment. But if it imprudently invests in those resources, then we must be held harmless for the imprudent or irresponsible actions of utility management. And so prudence is like the gold standard of utility law. And so if we challenge the prudence of a particular investment, that's very important, because that translates into us either, if we get an imprudence finding, us ratepayers either getting completely held harmless or partially held harmless, depending on what the evidence is. And in this case, the issue of cost reduction as a result of P&M's imprudence in 3 major areas worth hundreds of millions of dollars is at issue.
That's a lot of money, and who's supposed to pay for all of that? If I understand this correctly, that's the issue here. Is we're finding out through these cases and these decisions that will be coming up who is going to be on the hook for these millions, these hundreds of millions of dollars.
That is precisely the issue. So let's start with Four Corners. So when P&M invested in Four Corners, or reinvested in 2016 in Four Corners, it did no contemporaneous financial or resource alternative analysis. So that's like when you go and you look at a house that you want to buy, what do you say to your real estate agent? You say, show me the comps. We even have a slang word for it. And that stands for comparables. Why? Because you want to know what other 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom houses in the same neighborhood cost. And so that you can make an informed decision. And we do this all the time. You know, sometimes we do it over lunch on very simple things like, I have $15 to spend, and what do I want to do? I want to, buy a soup and salad, or do I want to buy a sandwich? And you make a quick determination because it's a relatively innocuous decision. But as the decisions become more and more costly, we are supposed to have criteria that we, and standards that we use to determine if this is a good investment or not. And of course we do that with a car or a house or the big things that we're going to spend our money on. And the utility is required by law to do the same thing, to take a hard look, to take the facts before it. So those are, is it going to be cost effective for ratepayers over a 20-year time frame? And compared to other possible energy resources, what are the benefits and risks? Those are the questions that PNM was supposed to ask in 2016 before it reinvested in coal. And, back in 2012 and 2013, there were coal plants shuttering all over the country because of, for instance, the rising cost of pollution controls. And that was important. And that's one of the risks that should have been considered. But did PNM consider that? No. And just so you know, in the Four Corners plant alone, PNM's the pollution controls were about $100 million. So we're talking about a lot of money. And when you just don't consider the real costs of a particular investment like coal versus solar, then you are making a decision without justification. And that's what we argued. That's what New Energy Economy argued in. And we said, you made this decision without considering the cost of pollution controls, without considering the cost to our climate and our environment, to intense water consumption at Four Corners. You just went and you re-upped. You just said, hey, we're going to continue in this coal plant. Now, what's important to know is that El Paso Electric, another monopoly electric utility in New Mexico, was facing the same decision. They were a partner in the Four Corners plant as well. And what they decided was they did do a financial analysis, and they did do a resource analysis. And what they determined after doing that analysis and pursuant to that analysis, like knowledge is power, right? Is, hey, they didn't think it was a wise investment for their ratepayers. And so they got out. They said, you know what? We're going to sell our 7% share in the Four Corners power plant. And that decision almost led to everyone to that plant closing, because what happened is that Arizona Public Service, the owner of that plant, said, okay, we have to, all the rest of the owners, and PNM is a partial owner, we're going to divvy up the 100 megawatts that El Paso owns. And so you'll take your percentage share. And what happened was that the California owners said, we're not going to take one other megawatt. We're not going to take any more of these shares. If you make us do that, APS, we're going to pull out of the plant too. But PNM was willing to actually even absorb all of El Paso Electric shares. Well, why? Well, we found out in Discovery, and Discovery is like this legal mechanism where we can ask PNM questions and they have to answer them. We said, give us all your communication amongst the co-owners at Four Corners and amongst senior management and your whole decision-making process around Four Corners. Because we knew that they hadn't done any financial analysis. We knew that EPE did, and we're scratching our heads. Well, why the heck did PNM just decide, okay, their 13% ownership, which is 200 megawatts, that they were going to just continue on when people were exiting from coal because it's a climate disaster? And what we found was a memo from PNM senior management, a lawyer, Patrick Apodaca, to the rest of the senior management at PNM. And it said, we don't want to cause a distraction at the PRC, the Public Regulation Commission, because we want to buy more coal at the San Juan plant. And we don't want them to wonder why we should be getting out of one coal plant, which is only 9 miles away, from the coal plant that they were not only an operator, they would not only were the owner of or a partial owner in San Juan, but the operator. And so that is not their own private business interests, is not a reason. It's not a legal justification for them investing nearly $1 billion, and that they want us to reimburse them for. And so we've been paying on that coal plant ever since 2016. And this is our first opportunity to say, you know what? You should have never been involved in re-upping your contract at Four Corners. It was a crazy decision at the time. Solar and gas even was cheaper. And now solar and storage is way cheaper. And you didn't do a financial analysis. You didn't do a resource alternative analysis. And you didn't do what regular other utility management requires, which is to do, to do their due diligence, really, and to make a responsible adult decision. They basically thought no one's going to ever catch us, which New Energy Economy did, and we're going to get away with this, and we'll get full cost recovery. And so our position in this rate case is not only should you not get any of the remaining investments, the capital expenditures like those pollution controls, but it wasn't only that. It was it is still a really poor performing plant. It runs, at that time, it ran somewhere between like 68 and 75% of the time. So that's like saying, oh, would you like to buy a car that only runs 3/4 of the time, and you never know when you need to get into it to go drive to work, if it's going to start or not? I don't think that sounds like a good investment. So in addition to all of the other things, it is a very poor performing plant and has huge carbon emissions, and also is leaking toxic waste into the no-name wash, which ultimately migrates into the San Juan River, and really is poisoning the people who live downstream of the Four Corners coal plant, which are mostly indigenous farmers and families. So for many reasons, they should not have invested in Four Corners. And so now we're saying, okay, it's time to pay up. And do we pay or do they pay? And our position is they have to pay for the poor decisions of utility management. And we're not only saying that they can't get all the recovery that they want, the cost recovery for the capital expenditures, which, the pollution controls and these other things that they invested in hundreds of millions of dollars. But we're saying it wasn't cost effective. And we know that from PNM's own testimony. They have testified that there's a whole bunch of different resources that are available that they could invest in that would be better for the climate, obviously reduce carbon emissions, and cheaper in our pocketbooks. And so we're saying Four Corners should come out of rate base, which means that you can get, as long as you decide to stay in Four Corners, PNM, we can pay you for the cost of energy while we're using it. But that's it. Nothing. Zero for capital expenditures. And it's got to come out of our rate base that we're charged. And that is a combination of not only Four Corners, but all of its other resources. And that's really important. And the reason it's really important is because if it comes out of rate base, then some of you may know that the Energy Transition Act was passed, also known as the ETA, and PNM got that passed so that they could get full recovery on anything any costs from San Juan or Four Corners, and if it comes out of rate base, they won't be able to get those costs back.
Now, you've mentioned this other plant that's 7 miles away, you said, San Juan, and there's a rates case associated with San Juan that's different, right?
Well, it's the same rate case, but the issues are quite similar, in fact. And that is that the San Juan plant is actually 9 kilometers away from the Four Corners plant. And as many of you know, the San Juan plant closed in 2022. And that was a great victory. The ETA, the Energy Transition Act, promised that in exchange for closure, PNM would get 100% cost recovery from ratepayers, but it would be pursuant to low interest bonds. And they told the commission that the bonds at the time of their application were at 2.23% interest rate. And they didn't, and over New Energy Economy's objections, and we said, hey, this interest rate is not locked in, and we were worried that interest rates would rise and that ratepayers would be screwed by PNM getting the 100% recovery. And that's not what happened in the past either. They only got 50% recovery, which was to symbolize a fair balancing between PNM's investors and shareholders. But now they were going to get 100% recovery as a little incentive for them to close the plant. So they signed this financing order. It was an ETA financing order. And they promised, okay, at the time of abandonment, what we're going to do is we're going to take all the costs that we're paying for San Juan, which before abandonment was $98 million a year. And we're going to stop charging customers because the plant isn't operating anymore. But when they closed the plant, they didn't do that. They didn't fulfill their promise. They kept on charging us as if the plant was operating. So right now, today, you and I are paying for San Juan costs as if the plant was operating. But the plant is not operating, and we're not even getting dirty energy from it. We're getting nothing, but we're paying them $98 million a year. And so the question in this case is, was that decision to delay the rate adjustment, was that a prudent decision? Or was that an irresponsible decision and one that just benefited PNM shareholders, actually to the detriment of us, of PNM ratepayers? So we're answering that question with a big, you owe us that money. You owe us that $98 million a year because basically you stole it from us. And guess what? What's so cool about this is that almost every single intervener, I think every single intervener, has said that this was an unfair dealing. That number one, PNM promised, and it reneged on its promise. And number two, that was a costly decision. And the decision benefited the 1% at Wall Street to the detriment of us. And that alone, we calculated, is about 10% of the average bill of a New Mexican. And so it's about $8 a month. And so when PNM says in their advertising or their PR, oh, well, there's only, even though that we're asking for a 9.65% increase in rates, you're only going to pay 75 cents more a month. That's because we're overpaying them right now about $8 a month. So that's why the increase is only 75% in their mind. But that's because they're ripping us off. And so we're not happy with that. And we want to be compensated, and we want a rate decrease as a result of their rate application. And so those are two things. One is that Four Corners saying, hey, you're not entitled to getting the cost recovery for your capital expenditures in a coal plant that you should never have invested in. And the second is we should get another rate decrease. Why? Because at San Juan, you imprudently continue to keep on collecting as if San Juan was operating when it's not. There's one more biggie, and that is...
Is that another coal plant?
No, this time it's a nuclear plant. And so those two are coal plants. Four Corners and San Juan is a coal plant. And they've been invested in those for about 50 years each. And the other one is Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station. And Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station is the largest nuclear power plant in the United States. And it's a 4,500 megawatt plant. PNM is a part owner in that plant. And it's the most expensive energy that we have is part of PNM's portfolio. And in some ways, I mean, I don't want us to be invested in that plant at all, for a whole bunch of reasons. It's the most expensive. We have no idea what to do with all the waste. It uses tons of water. And the capital expenditures associated with that plant are enormous. They're the largest of any single resource. Now, just think about it. Are we glad that they got updated new computer software for a nuclear power plant that could melt down? Yeah, we are. Are we glad that they have updated whatever they need so there won't be a meltdown? Yeah, of course we are. The issue, though, is, again, if you did a financial analysis and had to compare an investment in Palo Verde Nuclear with solar and storage, hands down, solar and storage is about an eighth the price and no risk. And so when PNM, again, invested in more Palo Verde shares, New Energy Economy said that was done imprudently. They did no financial analysis. We won in front of the hearing examiner. That's like the administrative law judge. We won in front of the commission, and we won in front of the New Mexico Supreme Court. And they said PNM was imprudent in investing in Palo Verde. Not all of Palo Verde, but 178 megawatts of their investment. Anyway, but despite the finding of imprudence, PNM is asking in this case for $100 million that we should pay them in cost recovery that they didn't collect from us for that imprudent investment. And those shares, listen to this craziness, have been sold to a third party. And yet they want us to be on the hook for all future decommissioning costs. And decommissioning costs are, how are we going to safely, quote unquote, because we have no idea how to do it safely, dispose of that nuclear waste? And we don't have an answer to it. So those costs could be enormous. And so our answer is, no, you don't get that nearly $100 million of nuclear when you invested imprudently. And no, we don't want to be on the hook for decommissioning costs at the plant when we're no longer being served by those nuclear shares. So that's another big, big issue in this case. Also in this rate case is an issue called return on equity. So P&M gets, for all their big things that they own, they get a return on equity. And what that means is they get, on top of getting cost recovery back for the investment, they get a 9.575% on top of the cost recovery we owe them. And the idea initially with giving investors a return on equity, and sometimes it's referred to as ROE, is because there were these big plants and they thought, how are we going to incentivize investors to invest in a $300 million coal plant? Well, we'll give them a guaranteed profit. And so then that will entice them to invest with us. And so the thing about it is that P&M has been getting this 9.5% increase, 9.5% ROE on all their big things. And they want to increase that to 10.25%. What do you get on your savings account or checking account? Do you get 10%? Do you even get 9.5%? Well, I don't either. And if we're lucky, we get 2 or 3 or 4%. And yet P&M, which is becoming less and less, the company is less and less exposed to risk, yet they want to increase their guarantee. And so this is important. So we're opposing their increase, and what our proposal is that they get a decrease from 9.5% to 8.9%. And one of the reasons is that they're not investing in big coal plants anymore, or big nuclear plants and or even big gas plants anymore. They are, for the most part, investing in third-party contracts. And contracts are pretty darn reliable and sure, certain. What they do they're saying to, a solar company, hey, we'll give you $100 million to build, a solar plant. And if the solar company doesn't do what they say, they can sue the solar company. You know what I mean? So it's not the same thing. They shouldn't be able to get as much, the investors shouldn't be able to get as much of an ROE, because there's not the need to incentivize them in the same way, because this is contract law, and that happens every day in the United States. But there's something else, and that is that about a third of our bill, P&M is going to get, no matter what. P&M is a monopoly, and that means that they have captive customers in a geographic area. So you think in large swaths, you're thinking Santa Fe and Albuquerque and Silver City area. And nobody within that area can go to another utility company. Yes, you could put solar on your house, but other than that, that's the only threat to P&M's monopoly. And so why should they be collecting such a large investor incentive when the rest of the market that doesn't have that monopoly protection is getting about a 5 or 6% return on their in the market? And so, in fact, P&M has more security and less risk, and the yet the ROE does not reflect adequately the less risk that they currently have.
So that basically sums up the rate cases, if I'm understanding. There's Four Corners, San Juan, Palo Verde, and the return on equity. Is there anything else that the listeners should know as we head into the fall and as these cases are going to start appearing before the PRC?
So one thing is that the hearing will begin on September 5th, and you'll have an opportunity to make your voice heard and to give public comment. And that's super important because the commission needs to hear from you that, like, a couple of big things. One is, why should we pay for P&M's imprudent decisions? And that's like, if we win, that's going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and we will definitely see a rate decrease in any of those situations. And then they don't need to be increasing their ROE. They need a decrease in it. They are looking to increase their base charge. And so, like, you look at your bill, and I forget the exact amount, but it's like $8 and something cents, 62 or something like that, that no matter if you don't use any electricity or not, you have to pay that amount. And they're looking to increase that as well. And there are other issues, but those are the biggies that make up that $791 million rate increase that they're looking for. And the thing is that people are struggling right now. There is a huge economic divide in our country that is getting worse and is growing. And unfortunately, it's these corporations that are growing so much. I think P&M made $200 million last year that they basically just exported to Wall Street, literally from our pockets, from your pocket, from mine. And mostly still, unfortunately, relying on dirty energy. And so the big issues in the case are get out of Four Corners, get out of Palo Verde completely, and give us solar storage and wind, which are much cheaper and obviously much better for the environment.
Well, as always, thank you for sitting down and explaining these complicated issues to the listeners. And as always, you can find out more and read our blog, which is released on a regular basis, New Energy Economy, online. And you can follow us on social media there. Just check us out, New Energy Economy. This has been Danger Varos with the Truth to Power podcast, sitting down with Mariel Nanasi. Everyone have a great afternoon.